Hey, I hope everyone's doing well. This is Ian Morrison, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer, the second most prolific serial killer in the United States. Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. As a young child, Ridgway's home life was troubled. Ridgway's relatives described his mother as domineering, and as a child, Ridgway observed violent arguments between his parents on more than one occasion. Growing up, Ridgway had a bedwetting problem until he was 13, and his mother would wash his genitals after each episode. Ridgway would later admit that as a young adult, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction toward his mom, and he often fantasized about killing her. After high school, Ridgway served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War, where he frequently had sexual relations with sex workers, even though he was married. After his first marriage fell apart due to infidelity on both sides, Ridgway married again and had a son with his second wife. During his second marriage, Ridgway became deeply religious, often reciting Bible verses and hymns. However, despite his beliefs, Ridgway continued to solicit the services of sex workers. Ridgway's wives would claim that Ridgway had an impossible to satisfy sexual appetite, and that he needed to have sex multiple times a day. Ridgway would marry again after his second marriage failed because of infidelity. Ridgway himself admitted to having a fixation with sex workers, with whom he had a love-hate relationship with. He frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but also took advantage of their services regularly. It is believed that Ridgway's distaste for sex workers came from his father, who was a bus driver. He complained about the presence of sex workers on his route. Some have speculated that Ridgway was torn between his lusts and his staunch religious beliefs. So now I'm going to discuss Ridgway's role as a Green River serial killer. So from 1982 to the mid-1990s, Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. Nobody's 100% certain on this number because Ridgway has admitted that he has killed so often that he lost count. Ridgway's victims were either sex workers or runaways, who he picked up along the Pacific Highway South, a state highway in the Seattle metropolitan area. Ridgway admitted that he targeted these victims because they were in vulnerable situations and that they were easy to pick up. To get the women to trust him, Ridgway would show them a picture of his son, or he would carry his son's toys in the car. After getting the women to trust him, Ridgway would rape them and then strangle them with his hands or with some sort of ligature. After killing his victims, Ridgway would then dump their bodies in the wooded areas around the Green River, which is the reason the media gave him the moniker, the Green River Killer. Ridgway would later admit that he would return to the dumping sites to have sex with the dead bodies because of his interest in necrophilia. Following the discovery of the first few bodies, the Green River Task Force was established in 1982. This was the largest task force established since the search for Ted Bundy. During the years of the Green River killings, Ridgway had a few run-ins with the law. In 1982, and later in 2001, Ridgway was arrested on charges related to prostitution. However, Ridgway didn't become a suspect in the Green River killings until 1983, when a victim's boyfriend followed a pickup truck suspected in the disappearances. This pickup truck was identified as Ridgway's, but he denied any contact with the victim. In 1984, Ridgway contacted the Green River Task Force under the guise of offering information to the police. Ridgway was questioned and police polygraphed him regarding the Green River killings, but he passed. In 1987, Ridgway's home and vehicles were searched by police after Ridgway was the last person seen with at least 2 victims of the Green River killer. Hair and saliva samples were also taken from Ridgway at the time, but Ridgway was not arrested because there was insufficient physical evidence to arrest him. The other issue inhibiting his arrest was that DNA testing was in its infancy during the 1990s, and as a result, the case ground to a standstill for 10 years. However, in 2001, state crime labs started using new DNA testing methods to retest the Green River killer evidence. These new DNA tests were STR and PCR testing. PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, is a reaction invented in 1983 by Carey Mullis that copies a particular region of DNA using primers. This process is essentially a form of molecular xeroxing that generates billions of copies of the targeted DNA sequences. There are three steps in the PCR process, which are denaturation, annealing, and extension. Denaturation occurs at higher temperatures to help separate the double-stranded DNA. Annealing occurs at much lower temperatures to allow for the primers to attach to the DNA, and extension is the step in which new DNA is synthesized and occurs at a slightly higher temperature than the annealing step. The PCR process is important because it requires a small amount of DNA to act as a template for amplification, and it can even amplify degraded DNA. In the case of the Green River Killer, forensic examiners were able to amplify the trace amount of DNA that they were able to rinse from the victim's fingernails and ligature marks in order to help establish a DNA profile using SDR. SDR, or short tandem repeats, are tandemly repeated sequences of 2 to 6 base pairs in length. The number of repeats at each genetic loci varies from person to person. Forensic laboratories generate DNA profiles by sequencing 20 unique SDR loci, with each loci having a possible 7 to 22 alleles. Laboratories then compile the number of repeats that they were able to observe at each loci. DNA analysts are then able to compare the DNA profiles from evidence in a known sample to determine if there is a link. SDR testing is important because it is compatible with degraded DNA in smaller product sizes. When combined with PCR, SDR testing is able to recover important information from small amounts of material. In the case of Gary Ridgway, forensic examiners completed new DNA profiles using SDR from 3 victims, and compared them with DNA collected from Ridgway in 1987. The profiles ended up matching Ridgway's profile, and he was subsequently arrested. So in 2001, Ridgway was arrested in connection with the slayings of 4 of the early victims of the Green River Killer. Ridgway's DNA was linked to 3 of them. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway entered a guilty plea to 49 charges of aggravated first-degree murder in exchange for his cooperation in locating other victims and providing other details. Ridgway was sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences without their chance at parole. And that's everything I've got prepared. I hope everybody's doing well, and thanks for listening.